18 suns, 18 miracles. For 10,000 years, that's the story the Imperium has told. But look a little closer, and that story begins to fall apart. The Primarchs weren't simply the Emperor's sons. They were the greatest weapons he would ever create, forged in a galaxy already collapsing into endless war. The Emperor didn't have centuries to perfect them. He needed them now. And when you're building weapons under impossible pressure, perfection is a luxury you can't afford. Looking across all 18 Primarchs, a disturbing pattern begins to emerge. The strength that made each Primarch legendary also became the flaw that defined their fate. Whether by design, necessity, or simple miscalculation, every gift came with a hidden cost. When I look at the tragic ruin of these demigods, I don't see 18 unrelated stories. I see the same pattern repeating itself again and again, which raises a disturbing question. What if the heresy wasn't simply a betrayal? And what if the seeds of it were planted long before any Primarch ever drew breath? The first suns were built to hold the line. What none of them could hold was themselves. No Primarch embodied duty more completely than Rogal Dorn. During the Siege of Terra, he held together an empire that was collapsing around him. Almost nothing could shake Rogal Dorn's resolve. It allowed him to command the entire Siege of Terra and personally resist centuries of Khorne's psychological warp isolation. He could see weaknesses in a fortress, long before anyone else even realized they existed, even under extreme pressure. But that same discipline came at a cost, because Dorn buried every emotion beneath duty until he barely knew how to face them himself. When Horus destroyed everything he had spent decades protecting, he didn't know how to grieve. Instead, he led the Imperial fists into the suicidal slaughter of the Iron Cage, as though war was the only language he still understood. But in the end, the man who could hold together an empire couldn't hold together himself. Being raised among the warring city-states of Olympia, Perturabo could see weaknesses that nobody else noticed. A fortress, a battle plan, even an empire. He instinctively knew where they would eventually break. Some accounts even suggest he could always see the Eye of Terror watching him from the edge of reality. Whether that's true or not, one thing is clear: Perturabo spent his entire life looking for flaws, until eventually he couldn't stop finding them. In walls, in people, even in himself. And maybe that's why trust became impossible and betrayal came so easily. But he spent his life finding cracks in everything, until eventually the deepest one was inside his own soul. The ash-choked world of Medusa forged Ferrus Manus into a demigod of unmatched physical strength, famously wrestling the great silver worm Azzinoth beneath a river of lava, fusing its living metal directly into his skin. When Ferrus said, "The flesh is weak," he wasn't preaching cybernetic obsession. He meant discipline, self-control, and strength earned through hardship. Except somewhere along the way, discipline became contempt. Ferrus grew so obsessed with strength that he stopped recognizing weakness, even in the brother standing beside him. By the time he realized what Fulgrim had become, it was already too late. Because his reward for that blind spot was death, and his own brother severed his head on the black sands of Istvanfar. No Primarch chased perfection more relentlessly than Fulgrim. As one of the Imperium's greatest duelists, he even survived a sniper round to the skull, and everywhere he went, people were drawn to him. But perfection was never just vanity, because the Emperor's children were slowly being destroyed by a genetic flaw, and Fulgrim believed only absolute excellence could save them. The tragedy was that perfection leaves no room for imperfection. When the Leia blade, a demonic temptation, whispered that he could become even greater, Fulgrim couldn't ignore it. And the pursuit of perfection didn't make Fulgrim stronger. It simply gave chaos the perfect place to begin. That's 4 brothers now, 4 different strengths. If this were coincidence, it would have broken by now, but it hasn't. Some Primarchs weren't built to fight, they were built to see further than anyone else. That gift would cost them just as much. Magnus the Red could see more than any other Primarch. He could reshape reality with his mind, grow to the size of a war machine, and speak with the Emperor across the stars. Many believe he was created to one day bear the burden of the Golden Throne itself, but supreme sight breeds supreme arrogance. The more Magnus understood the warp, the more convinced he became that nobody, not even the Emperor, could truly teach him anything new. So when Horus fell, Magnus chose to save humanity the only way he thought he could. However, in doing so, he shattered the Emperor's secret webway project and doomed the very future he was trying to protect. But the Primarch, who understood the warp better than anyone else, became the one it deceived most completely. Mortarion could survive what would kill almost anyone else. On Barbarous, he climbed poison-soaked mountains and breathed air so toxic that ordinary humans died within moments. Even after becoming a Primarch, he continued wearing a mask that pumped poisonous vapors into his lungs, refusing to let comfort weaken him. But surviving suffering slowly became his entire identity. He stopped believing pain should ever be escaped, only endured. And that became the cruelest irony of all. Because when Nurgle trapped the Death Guard inside the warp, Mortarion's legendary endurance didn't save him. It simply meant he suffered longer than anyone else, until even his pride finally broke. But the Primarch who could endure anything was defeated by the one thing he refused to do. Leman Russ was the Emperor's executioner, feared as much for his relentless will as for his skill in battle. Even enemy psychers struggled to withstand his presence, yet Russ never saw himself as a sorcerer. His own rune priests insisted their powers came from the spirit of Fenris rather than the warp, and Russ accepted that distinction without question. The problem was, that blind spot became his greatest weakness, because convinced Magnus had gone too far that Russ burned Prospero to ash, never realizing he had been manipulated into destroying the very brother who might have saved the Emperor's dream. But Russ believed he was executing justice. Yet, history remembers him as executing the wrong brother. No Primarch suffered more than Angron. Before the butcher's nails ever mutilated his mind, he was a psychic empath, able to take away the pain of others with nothing more than a touch. Then everything changed. The nails turned compassion into endless agony. Yet even in that broken state, Angron remained terrifyingly powerful, once holding back the foot of a warhound titan with his bare hands. But that strength was meaningless, because a soul meant to ease suffering had been transformed into a weapon that could never escape its own. By the time Khorne claimed him, Chaos wasn't offering freedom, it was offering relief. But the cruelest part wasn't that Angron became a monster, it was that he never wanted to be one. After the Seers came the ones who tried to hold the Imperium together with strategy and belief instead of strength. No Primarch actually understood the Imperium better than Roboute Guilliman. He could coordinate the resources of 1,000 worlds, outthink almost any commander, and even survived fighting in the vacuum of space without a helmet. If anyone could rebuild an empire, it was Guilliman. Except, intelligence has its own blind spots, because Guilliman always believed every problem had a solution, every crisis a plan, and every setback another calculation. Then his brothers fell. His father became a silent corpse upon the Golden Throne, and for the first time, he faced something strategy couldn't solve. Guilliman knew how to save an empire, yet he never learned how to mourn one. More than any other Primarch, Lorgar wanted something to believe in. His words could unite entire civilizations, and even those who opposed him found themselves listening. He carried a strange gift for sensing the warp long before most people even understood it existed. But Lorgar's greatest strength was also his greatest weakness: faith. When the Emperor destroyed Monarchia and condemned his worship, he didn't just punish a son, he shattered the foundation of Lorgar's entire identity. If the Emperor refused to be a god, Lorgar would simply find gods who accepted him instead, and the warp was waiting. But still, the first Primarch to seek the truth became the first to embrace the greatest lie. No Primarch could disappear quite like Corvus Corax. His uncanny ability to slip unnoticed through the battlefield was so complete that enemies often failed to realize he had ever been there at all. After the Heresy, that gift evolved even further, allowing Corax to become a living storm of shadow and ravens within the Eye of Terror itself. However, disappearing became more than a battlefield tactic, because Corax struggled to trust even his own legion, rejecting the Terran-born Raven Guard because they reminded him of everything he hated. But long before the Heresy truly broke the Imperium, Corax had already begun losing the people closest to him, and the Master of Shadows eventually became one himself. But not every flaw was loud. Some Primarchs were undone by exactly how well they could disappear. a single soul engineered across twin bodies, Alpharius and Omegon. They could alter their appearance, mask their warp signatures, and vanish among their own legion until even fellow Primarchs questioned who they were speaking to. They could even share fragments of their own Primarch essence with trusted legionaries, allowing ordinary Space Marines to briefly think with a Primarch's instincts. But a life built entirely on secrets comes with a price. Eventually, the twins stopped knowing where deception ended and reality began. Their greatest weapon became their prison, until the one brother who never played games, Rogal Dorn, answered every lie with a single, brutally honest blade, and the masters of deception became the first victims of their own lies. Even the ones built for deception weren't spared. Whatever is doing this, it isn't picking favorites. Konrad Curze always knew how everything would end. That was the problem. His terrifying gift of foresight never showed him hope, only murder, betrayal, and the endless collapse of everything around him. There was no escaping those visions. Even sleep became another prison. Over time, Curze stopped believing the future could be changed at all. Instead of resisting his nightmares, he began bringing them to life himself, convinced destiny was inevitable. In the end, he even accepted his own assassination, believing death was the only future he had never been able to escape. But Curze wasn't actually destroyed by the future. He was destroyed by believing it could never change. Freedom meant everything to Jaghatai Khan. In battle, he entered a state of perfect focus where thought and movement became one, earning the name the Laughing Killer as he cut through enemies faster than they could react. Except the same spirit that made him impossible to catch also made him impossible to hold. Khan never truly belonged to any court, kingdom, or empire. He was always chasing the next horizon, always searching for something beyond the battlefield. But in the end, the fastest of the Primarchs wasn't running from his enemies. He was running from the loneliness that could never quite catch him. Death meant something different for Vulkan. No matter how many times he was killed, he always returned. His body could recover from wounds that would erase any other Primarch from history. But immortality came with a price. His body healed. His memories never did. And every death left another scar that only Vulkan could remember, until centuries of suffering became too much for even a Primarch to bear. Eventually, the kindest of the Emperor's sons withdrew from the galaxy. Not because his body had failed, but because his mind finally had. The Lion trusted almost no one. Raised among the deadly forests of Caliban, he became the Imperium's greatest hunter, a warrior whose resistance to the warp and unmatched skill with a blade made him one of the Emperor's most dangerous sons. In later years, he even learned to forest warp, crossing impossible distances through mysterious pathways few others could understand. But years of surviving alone shaped more than his fighting ability. They taught him to rely only on himself, but the Lion expected loyalty without explanation and obedience without trust, never realizing how deeply that silence wounded the people closest to him. By the time he returned to Caliban, Luther had already become the very monster the Lion had spent his entire life hunting. Two Primarchs, one brotherhood, and the clearest proof yet that even love was never safe from this pattern. Sanguinius knew exactly how he was going to die. Long before Horus ever reached Terra, he had already seen his own death waiting for him. Yet he still chose to fight. Gifted with angelic wings, extraordinary foresight, and a bond with his legion unlike any other Primarch, Sanguinius seemed almost perfect. But perfection hid another burden. The red thirst haunted him every day, a darkness he spent his entire life keeping hidden from his sons. Every night, his visions forced him to relive the moment Horus would finally kill him, and every morning he chose to stand anyway. But the greatest courage Sanguinius ever showed wasn't facing Horus. It was choosing to walk toward a fate he already knew he couldn't escape. Horus was the son the Emperor trusted most. Charismatic, brilliant, and admired by almost every one of his brothers, he seemed destined to unite the Imperium long after the Great Crusade had ended. But even Horus carried a weakness. For all his victories, he still longed for one thing his father rarely gave him: reassurance. Chaos didn't corrupt Horus by promising him power. It corrupted him by convincing him he had already been abandoned. The same gift that made Horus the heart of the Imperium became the wound through which chaos reached him. But the Primarch created to unite humanity became the one who tore it apart. 18 sons, 18 legends, 18 tragedies. Looking across every Primarch, one pattern keeps repeating. The very qualities that made them extraordinary, duty, knowledge, faith, perfection, compassion, loyalty, also became the blind spots that shaped their fate. Maybe the Emperor never intended it, but intent stopped mattering the moment he needed sons powerful enough to win a war across a galaxy already burning. And power at that scale always comes with a cost attached. The only question left is whether the Emperor knew that cost when he made them, or whether even he didn't understand what he was creating until it was already too late. Which Primarch do you think carried the most tragic burden? Let me know below.